Good evening, everyone, and now then, let's go to today's story, which is from Mr. Renato, and this happened to him in the city of Sao Leopoldo, which is in the state of Rio Grande do Sul, and at that time, which was in the year 2002, Mr. Morrow was 47 years old. And it all started like this. I lived in a rural area of my city for many years, and then I moved to a common neighborhood in my city, but as I had the habit, I always went back to visit the rural area, to meet up with my old friends, and sometimes I even spent the whole day in the farms of these acquaintances. But one time, I went to the rural area, to fish in the river with a colleague, and we went by car, and as it was a weekend, we were catching fish until around midnight. As it was very late, that was our time to leave. So we started the car and took our way back to our homes. Well, everything was normal that night. We had caught many fish and were happily going back to our homes. But what happened next, while I was driving along a dirt road, was that I saw a strange movement of a horse through the fence of a pasture, and soon I also saw that there were two or more shadows of some strange animal attacking the horse. With that, my colleague stopped the car in front of the pasture. We got out of the car and went to the farm's enclosure and started to look closer, and to our amazement, we saw that there were two huge animals that were very strange. They looked like two monkeys with big ears, and these creatures surrounded and attacked the horse and wouldn't let him run away, and these creatures also had a kind of light in their eyes, which seemed to be lit. And this was a very scary thing indeed, but those two beings kept attacking and biting the horse, which was already exhausted from the fight and would end up dying there. At this time, my partner picked up a rock in the middle of the road and threw it at those creatures, and a strange thing started to happen, because those two beasts stopped biting the horse, and they kept staring at us. I threw another rock at them too, to see if they would scare them away, but then, my partner and I had a surprise, for not only did those two beasts get up and stand on two legs only, as if they were men, but these werewolves widened their eyes in anger and came walking towards us, and by the looks of it they were going to attack us. The fact is, at this moment, we were quite frightened by this scene, and we got into the car, started the engine, and began to leave the place, and as we drove away along the dirt road, my friend and I talked and agreed that these creatures were werewolves, for these beings had a body type almost similar to that of a man, but hairy, and these creatures also had a snout, and their head looked like that of a dog. After this fright, I arrived at my home, which was in a nearby neighborhood, and already inside my house, I thought about these two dangerous beasts that were werewolves, and that they really exist, because the old people said that they had seen these beasts around the regions many years ago. After a few hours, the day dawned, and I went to talk to my fishing friend, and we drove back in front of that farm, where we saw the two werewolves attacking the horse. But the owner was at the gate of this place, and so we stopped to talk to this man about his horse and what had hurt the animal at dawn, and so we told this man that his animal was attacked by two werewolves and that we passed by nearby, and we saw this scene of these two creatures hurting his horse, and the owner of the farm realized that we had spoken the truth, and he showed us the horse that had been attacked by the two creatures, and we saw that this animal had several wounds all over its body, because it had been bitten several times by the two beasts. But the man then said that he was very lucky, because he woke up with the barking of his dogs near the paddock, and soon after, he saw his horse all wounded near his house, and so he took his shotgun and kept watch until dawn to catch the person who had done all this evil to his animal. But when we finished all this talk, my friend and I went back to our neighborhood, and to feel better, I called the police and told them that there were two maned wolves lost in the neighborhood nearby, and that I had almost been attacked by these animals. The fact is that time went by, and I was recovering from the trauma I had experienced with those werewolves, and until one day, I went to visit a friend of mine who worked as a foreman on a large farm in the region, and getting there, I picked some fruit to take away, and also had lunch with my friend the foreman and catching up on our conversations. I saw that there were two strange men working on this farm, and asked my friend if they were new workers on the property, and my friend said no, and who arranged these two guys was a friend of his who had met these guys working on a construction site of helpers. But what happened was that these two guys came to sit at the table with me for lunch too, and I noticed that one of them had a tattoo of two wolves together on his arm, with a phrase written, "Brothers Wolves," and I saw that the other brother also had a tattoo like that. Well, I began to tell my story that I spent with those two creatures a few days ago, and those two guys were not funny while I told my story, but my friend Foreman was very interested in what I told. At that time I saw my friend's dogs tied to the collar, and asked my friend why he did this with his dogs. Then he told me that his dogs did not like the two brothers and wanted to attack them for no reason. So this my friend Foreman had to arrest his dogs. Well, as soon as lunch was over, I stayed the whole afternoon on my friend's farm, and I noticed that those two brothers were looking in my direction, and it was like that until it was time for me to leave the property. Anyway, I went back to my house. I went on with my life as usual, and after a few days had passed, I went to the farm of the old man where the horse was attacked by the two werewolves to see how the animal was doing, and the owner of the horse told me something amazing, for he told me that he stayed up several nights waiting for the creatures to return, until one night, the old farmer saw these two strange animals hiding inside his farm. Then the old man started shooting at the two creatures, and they ran and jumped the farm fence and disappeared. I was very worried about these creatures, because still these two werewolves were still prowling around my neighborhood. Finally, the other day, I went back to my friend's farm, where those two brothers worked, and arriving at the property, my friend told me that one of the werewolf brothers came back to the farm, and he asked for an advance of money from the service they were providing, because his other brother was shot, and then the guy received the money and left. Well, as the weeks went by, the two brothers disappeared, and I never saw them again, and of course, I began to suspect that these brothers were the two werewolves, because the old farmer said that he shot these creatures, and sure enough, he shot the gun at one of the creatures, and also one of the brothers appeared shot. To me, they could be the two werewolves that attacked the horse. But one thing I know, I saw two werewolves in the pasture, and it was real. And that was my horror story. And before we go on to the next werewolf story, please like the video, and subscribe to the Zone of Fear channel. The Fear Zone channel. Good evening everyone, and today's report is from Mr. Loro, and this happened to him in the year 2001, when he was 35 years old, and was in the city of Itabira, which is in the state of Minas Gerais. And today, I'm going to talk about a terrifying and surprising thing, where the creature, which seemed to be a werewolf, did something macabre in my neighborhood, and whether it was justice or not, you decide. And it all started like this. I lived in a neighborhood on the outskirts of my city, and my neighbor, who was a good friend of mine, he liked to barbecue on his farm on weekends. But one Friday, this neighbor called me to join his barbecue, and this was around 9 o'clock at night. So I agreed, and ended up going to his residence, and then we lit the grill, and began to roast the meat. But while we were preparing the barbecue, we were talking, and also looking at those dark woods, and while we were watching the darkness of the place. But suddenly we saw something strange. because there was an unknown man, and he was walking through the trees in the bush, and it seemed that he didn't want to be seen by anyone. However, my neighbor and I climbed on top of the roof of the house, and we looked into the woods to find this suspicious walker, but the guy disappeared. We thought it might be some maniac walking in that darkness. Well, but time went by, and when it was around 2 o'clock in the morning, we heard many barking dogs near the farm, and looking around the property, we saw a strange thing, because there was a kind of animal running around near the farm, but that beast came walking on 4 legs in our direction, but the animal realized that we saw it, and strangely, the animal hid in some woods near the fence of the farm. What I found strange was the eyes of that animal, because even the creature hidden, you could see his eyes in the dark, and it was scary, because they shone a lot, and also the size of that creature seemed to be very large. At this time, my friend and I stood there watching, and seeing what kind of animal it was, but soon this creature disappeared from that place. Finally, it didn't take long before the dogs were barking at the fence. My neighbor and I couldn't see anything because of the darkness, but even so, we thought it was that animal, and we started throwing several rocks into the dark woods, and to our amazement, an unbelievable thing happened, because that strange beast came running out of the woods, but he was standing up, and growling in pain, and it looked like a very hairy man, and it fell to the ground, and then the beast got up, and for sure, one of the stones that we threw at the beast wounded it seriously. We were afraid, with the noises that this monster made, but then, this werewolf entered the dark woods and disappeared. My neighbor and I ran to the house, scared, and locked ourselves in, looking through the window, to see if the werewolf was still around. At this, my neighbor took his hunting gun, and we stood on the slab of the house waiting for the werewolf to return, but the werewolf still didn't appear. However, we still heard many barking dogs in the distance, and we were alerted by these signs. Finally, after some time, the silence returned, and we were talking. My neighbor also thought that the beast was a werewolf, and of course, we were worried and very afraid for the rest of the night. It was like this until the day. However, when 2 days had passed since the appearance of the werewolf, my neighbor called me to see something that was happening in the bushes, and it was around 9 o'clock at night. I went into my neighbor's house, and we went up on the roof to see what was happening. As soon as I got to the top of the house, I saw 2 police cars 100 meters away, and it seemed that the police were looking for someone or something in that place, which was a thicket, and after all that movement, the military ended up getting something big out of the woods. My neighbor and I were curious and went to the cops, because we thought they had caught the werewolf. Well, when we arrived on the scene, we saw that the police took from the middle of the woods was the body of a man, and for sure was that walker that we saw the day that my neighbor made the barbecue, and maybe this stranger was running away from the werewolf that night, but this dead man was also attacked by some kind of beast, because his body the wound marks were as if he was attacked by some kind of very large beast. The policeman asked the residents if anyone saw any wild beasts, but the people said they saw nothing, and my neighbor and I stayed put so as not to become suspects in this story. After that day, I became more scared of the werewolf and what these creatures are capable of, so I kept watch at my place at night, so as not to be surprised by these creatures. But as the days passed, I got to know something amazing, because the wanderer that the police found dead in the woods, I found out that this suspect was a maniac wanted by the police, in which he had already committed several serious crimes that I can't talk about here, and the werewolf did me a favor by putting an end to this man, and you know, the kind of evil that this maniac planned to do in the city. And for me, this maniac was attacked by that werewolf that I saw at dawn. The fact is that the werewolf was no longer seen, and nobody knew anything about this beast. At last, these creatures exist and attack people, but there are also maniacs walking around in the early morning hours, which can be much worse than a werewolf. Thanks for watching the video, and if you like it, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Fear Zone Channel, your channel of terror. Good evening everyone, and now then, we go to the story of today, which is Mr. Valdo, and this happened to him in the city of Santo Antonio de Jesus, which is in the state of Bahia, and at that time, which was in the year 2008, Mr. Valdo had 31 years. And to begin my story, I live in a rural village in my city, and there, most of the residents are simple people, but in my region also, people like to hunt armadillos. So, one weekend, a friend of mine called Alex came to my house, and he invited me to hunt armadillos in an area in his neighborhood, and as I was not doing anything, I agreed to go on this hunt, and also took my rifle and flashlight, and took my 2 dogs to help hunt. So, my friend and I went on foot to this place to look for armadillos, and we arrived in this forest around 8 o'clock at night. And after a long time in the bush, hunting animals, what was happening was that we couldn't catch any armadillos, maybe because many people hunted in the bush, and it was very hard to find them, and we didn't want to go back to our homes empty-handed, so we walked through the vegetation, and we went deeper and deeper into the bush, practically far away from any village or house, and in this remote place we caught the first armadillo. It was already late at this time, and we had to leave, but we were excited and wanted to catch another hunt, so we could have 1 armadillo each. After a while, we caught another armadillo, and satisfied with our kill, we decided to leave the forest, and started to take the road back to our houses. After walking for a few minutes, we began to smell smoke somewhere in the woods, and we passed a place near some trees, and saw by the light of our flashlights a fire on the ground, but there was no one there, so we found that the smell of smoke was coming from that place, and on the ground there were some clothes and shoes. We found that place strange, but we left it alone, and kept walking to get to our houses. But when we were on a trail in the middle of the bush, my dog started barking. I looked, and saw nothing, but then, my 2 dogs came running and seemed to be going after something, but what happened was that I and my friend began to hear one of my dogs moaning and screaming in the distance, and it seemed that he had been attacked by some animal. I was afraid and scared, and I didn't really know what was happening, but the noises of my dog's screams were fading away, and it seemed that the animal that got my dog was going further and further away and taking my dog, and since I was armed with a shotgun, my colleague and I went after my dog quickly in order to save him. So we started walking, and passing the light of the flashlight through the vegetation, and then my partner told me to turn off the flashlight, and we stayed still in the middle of the dark woods, and soon we started to hear the sound of one of my dogs barking, and then we ran in that direction, and we arrived in another part of the forest, where we saw my other dog barking at something. Then we started to look around, and we saw the shape of a huge beast, and it was carrying my dog stuck in its mouth, but my other dog wouldn't let the creature take my other dog, and as that strange beast didn't want to let go of my dog, I shined the flashlight on that creature, and at that moment, that beast got scared, and looked at us, and let go of my dog. But cleverly this creature ran into the bush and disappeared, and I saw that it was a huge animal, like a deformed dog, but it was huge, and I got a fright, because it still had a strong light in its eyes, which looked like 2 lit lights. As I didn't see that animal anymore, so I walked forward with the rifle in my hands, to get my dog, and when I got close to my dog, he started to get better. But soon, and I heard a growling noise, and my friend threw the light of the flashlight in the direction of a tree, and we saw something strange, for that beast was behind the tree hiding. I pointed my gun in the direction of the creature, but that creature began to growl more angrily, and that animal ended up getting up and stood on 2 legs. At that time I realized that it was a werewolf, and I shot it in the trunk of the tree, and that creature cleverly didn't come out from behind the tree. So I reloaded my gun, but at that instant that werewolf ran into the woods and disappeared into the darkness. By this time, I was pretty scared, and my friend and I started running through the woods desperately, and I kept wondering if the creature was still after us. But just as well, we reached a dirt road near a village, and with this we were a little calmer, and at least nothing else happened. After walking for a while, we arrived at my friend's house, and I bandaged my dog, because he took a serious bite from the werewolf, but otherwise, we spent the rest of the night awake, and talking about what was that creature that got our dog, and of course, the most obvious thing we came up with in this conversation was that it was for sure a werewolf, and also, that fire lit in the woods and those clothes and shoes that we saw in the woods was someone who turned into the werewolf we saw. But when the day dawned, I went back to my house and kept thinking that these werewolves really exist. As the days went by, my hunting friend and I kept thinking how to alert the people in the nearby villages to warn them that there was a werewolf prowling around the area, and also, for sure, no one would believe our report, and what we did was that we just wrote on some posters that there was a werewolf around. We spread these leaves in the neighborhood without anyone seeing us, and with this attitude, our hope was that those who saw this creature would read the leaflets and end up leaving the area, because as far as I know, I learned, is that a man who sees this creature, and if you meet one day a beast like this in front of you and survive, do this, at least put up warning posters around the neighborhood, warning people. I do not know if this plan worked or not, but at least I did not know of any other appearance of this werewolf until today, and also never went hunting armadillos until today, because I do not want to be hunted by a werewolf again. Good night. If you liked the story, give a like, and if you are not subscribed yet, then subscribe to the channel Fear Zone to receive new videos from the channel. Until the next.